Well, that's good enough. That's 804 area code. So that's us. And wow, that's Stephanie. And Stephanie, who's your guest?
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. This is WRWK 93.9 FM in Midlothian. My name is Stephanie. This is In the Frequency of Hope. And tonight, my guest in the studio is Danita Green. She's one of the co-founders of the local chapter of Coming to the Table. Hi, Danita.
Hi, how are you tonight, Stephanie?
I am well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to get the invitation.
This is exciting. This is so exciting. So tonight, what we are going to be talking about is Juneteenth. We're going to be celebrating Juneteenth. So we'll start off by informing folks about what exactly Juneteenth is for folks who haven't heard of it before.
All right.
Americans love an excuse to party. So we love a holiday, right?
Well, this is the best excuse to party, as you say. But Juneteenth is more, I should say, more of a remembrance, observance, and it's also a celebration. My best frame of reference is the Sankofa symbol. Some people have seen it. It's an African symbol, and it's a bird walking forward. His feet are going forward, and his head is going backwards. Sankofa is all about moving into the future and remembering the past, and that is the real basis and foundation for Juneteenth. Juneteenth actually started in 1865 at the end of, as you say, the Civil War, but that was also 2 years after emancipation, where, we know the emancipation, the slaves were freed, the enslaved Africans were freed, and that message did not get to everyone. We think it's just like, oh, everybody's on cell phones and we just say, hey, we're free and there's partying in the streets. But it took a while for communities of enslaved Africans all over the South and also into the West and the North to get the notice that they were free. And as it turns out, in parts of Texas, there were folks who did not get the message at all, and they remained slaves for another 2 years until a Union Army general went down into that area and brought the news that they were emancipated. And that day was June 19th, 1865. So we remember it, particularly in the African American communities, that it is Freedom Day for us, more so than July 4th or any other day. It's definitely what we consider our Freedom Day. And particularly here in the South, a lot of organizations and cities supported by the city governments have chosen many, many ways to observe Juneteenth. And people ask me quite often, where does the name exactly come from? The Juneteenth, putting the date and the month together. I'm not quite sure, but it works. And I think on the calendar, we still recognize it as being on the 19th. However, there's celebrations that start as soon as June 1st. And hopefully I'll get an opportunity to talk to you about some of those celebrations tonight.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait to discuss some of the things that I have seen myself. And we will have a couple of other folks calling in tonight to share about some other Juneteenth events that are happening around the state.
Great.
Yes, that's pretty exciting. So I passed over some information to Ron so that he can include that in the live stream feed, information about the Sankofa. Okay.
Great.
There we go. So I think, where do I want to start? Where do I even want to start with this? Juneteenth, for folks who aren't in the know. As we already talked about, there's this period of time. I think a lot of us who consider ourselves to be good history students,
Right.
we know exactly all those things about the important dates that they made us memorize in junior high school, and you can recite those. And so there's the Emancipation Proclamation, and there's this date, and there's that date, and then there's the reconciliation, and this thing, and da. And it sort of gets lost in there.
I was about to say, this date probably got lost.
It got lost in there. Well, and
yes.
So, and I think we're being generous when they say that.
Lost.
I'm looking at you, book writers. And
Yes.
I know that I was raised here in the South. I was actually raised right here in Richmond, Virginia. And so one of the things that really struck me when I went out this weekend and I participated, in particular in the walk along the trail,
Yes.
along the river,
The Trail of Enslaved Africans, yes.
was
Some people call the Richmond Slave Trail.
Yes. One of the things that I was really struck by in that, there were many things, obviously, is that I'm a hometown girl. I grew up here. There's not, I felt like, I used to feel like there's not much about Richmond that I don't know. I'd be the perfect tour for Richmond. I've lived here my whole life. I've seen all the things. I've been to all the places and right. And there was such a disconnect between the education that I received in my primary education versus what I received by the time I went to college.
Right.
There was such a disconnect in the stories that were being told. And it was a very jarring experience to be like, wait, what?
Right. And
why didn't y'all tell me? Wait a minute.
Right. And to be quite frank with you, I grew up in Richmond as well, in public school, and no one ever told me anything about Juneteenth. This is the kind of knowledge that you kind of get for yourself. I came up doing integration, and my history books, as yours, had a lot to be desired. There were a lot of things missing. There are a lot of things missing. And I can't say it's too much better now. Not so much. Not so much now. And Juneteenth is not something more than likely you'll see in a history book. But thank goodness that we're in the time now that we, all over the country, we are doing truth-telling in history, which I love that phrase, truth-telling in history, where our stories, not just the ones of European Americans, white Americans, and not just the ones of African Americans, Black people, but everyone's stories are coming into the limelight. And so we're seeing history told from different points of view. And if I may, I have to give a shout out to my wonderful friends at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and also the newly renovated American Civil War Museum, because these museums, just like many others now across the country, are taking the time to revisit these stories of our combined histories from different points of view. So now we're hearing about Juneteenth, this beautiful celebration of, again, remembering the past while moving forward in a way that we would have never learned about before.
Yeah.
It's an excellent time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Sherry is with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. So another one of my guests this evening is Sherry Bailey of Juneteenth, Virginia. Sherry, thank you very much for calling in tonight.
Thank you very much for letting me know this was happening. I really appreciate it.
Excellent.
Can I give her a shout out? Hey, Sherry.
Is that Danita?
Yes. Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for calling in. This is awesome.
Absolutely. I wish I could be there, but trying to be in two places at one time doesn't really work for me. So
yes. Welcome.
I'm so grateful to you for calling in tonight and sharing the breadth of your knowledge with us, Sherry. For folks who aren't familiar with you, Sherry is actually doing in the Portsmouth region much of what the Alegba Folklore Society just did here in Richmond over this past weekend in arranging, a series of commemorative events sustained over several days, I believe, in the Portsmouth area. And she has called in to share some of her experiences and insights. So I just want to turn it over to you, Sherry. Go ahead and tell us what you would like to so far, and then maybe I'll come up with some questions.
This is our 20th year doing Juneteenth here in Tidewater, Hampton Roads. And when we first started 20 years ago, it was a lot of June who, June what? And so I feel very proud of the fact that even if people don't celebrate, they know, first of all, how to pronounce it, how to spell it, and they're aware of Juneteenth. And I feel like that's really a giant step forward, because what we do here in Hampton Roads is that we research that history that pertains to how slavery started and ended in America, because that American history is our local history. And we find that, by researching this history, and then we put it on stage and plays and programs that allow people to have conversations about this difficult history. And that's our belief in terms of how we ultimately will get over the legacy of slavery. Our mission is to help America heal from the wounds of slavery without shame or blame. And to do that, you have to have people being able to talk to each other, listen carefully, speak honestly, and be able to have that interaction. And so that's a big part of what we do here in Tidewater, Hampton Roads area. This area, as I say, because of the history, I think that we have an opportunity to create a blueprint that will help other communities figure out how to deal with their difficult history, because that history is difficult from, day one, from the time that the English were able to help, to get Jamestown to thrive, starting in 1607, to get us to where we are today in 2019, that there's a lot of bad history there, we know. Yes. And so what we feel like, the tool that we would like to create for other communities is to help other communities figure out how to access that history and to be able to move beyond it.
Awesome. I have to say that, Sherry, I know you've been doing this a long time, and Sherry invited me and some other friends to come down to the Tidewater area and participate with the Juneteenth celebration that she has been really ushering in so well, shepherding that event there. And it was just fabulous. And Sherry, I'm just going to say this. One of the things that I really liked about this, the remembrance observance that you put together was that you really went out of the way to really make it very communal, which means you had young children, you had the youth, you had families all literally taking part, coming up to an altar, making affirmations, and really seeding into the real spirit of Juneteenth. And it was something I have not forgotten. So great job with what you're doing down in that area.
Well, so you're talking about the Day of Remembrance that was at Buckrow Beach last weekend?
Well, actually, we went last year. I went, and the year before.
Okay.
Yes.
That is organized by a young woman, Chandra Pittman, and yes. I think this was let me not be incorrect, but I think this has been about 5 years that she's been doing that, yes. And it was. It's quite a spiritual experience, and I think that's what really people need, because again, we're dealing with such horrific facts and past and history that to be able to take a deep breath and just kind of be cleansed is a necessary goal, a necessary thing to have people be able to experience. And so I agree. It is a really wonderful experience to do that Day of Remembrance.
Right. It's Shadra, as you say, Shadra Pittman. She really did an excellent job. She really did an extra job. But one year, I know Marsha Sneed Williams and I came down for an event that you did in that area.
I think you came down we were at the Portsmouth City Park. And we did a libation. In fact, yes. you and Marcia helped with the libation, and we kind of spread out and again we always want to do the plays, what I call the history plays, right. Which you are very familiar with. One of them, the Two Harriet, which I miss not doing that in Richmond this year, but hopefully again we can resume that next year, yes. Because I find that the history plays are really they're they bring the audience into the conversation in a really direct way. And again, having the conversations is the goal of all the work, because without those conversations, we'd make no progress. And so, and certainly you're familiar with your work with incarcerated population and so forth. So you know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of why it's important to do that kind of work.
Well, and absolutely. And Stephanie, I'm not trying to run away with your show. I'm having a conversation with my friend here.
That's what we're here for.
And we have a lot of things in common. We are both writers and playwriters, and Sherry is a phenomenal director. She was good enough to come up and direct my play several years ago, and I was able to produce hers for the city of Richmond 2 years running. And yes, we can possibly do that again. But I wanted to mention that in the celebrations that I've noticed across the country with Juneteenth, it really is turning out to be truth-telling in history, storytelling in many, many different ways. And that's through dance, it's through creative arts. Yes. Go ahead, Sherry.
It's really, truly important. Because here's the thing about the arts. Everyone can participate in that. And it is important, again, to tell these stories. Again, this is why creating a blueprint for how communities can access this history, I think, is one of the best tools that we can develop as activists in this work. And to that end, here in Hampton Roads, we are looking to start the Portsmouth Theater Academy, PTA, which will be used to train ordinary folks how to be reenactors, as well as it will train them to be actors on the Broadway stage. And what I've found when you put people in theater is that you find first of all, there's no such thing as a small role. Every role is important, and there's a role for everyone in the theater. And from accounting to wardrobe. And what happens is that people get all of these wonderful skills like team building,
yes,
and self-esteem, better reading skills, just all sorts of gifts that come from that part of, from participating in the arts. And so I think finally there's an understanding of the need to, the arts, usually are the first thing to go in terms of a curriculum, but we are rebuilding or reframing history here in Hampton Roads. For one thing, we look at things like the 1831 Nat Turner insurrection as being the first battle of the Civil War. The first battle of the Civil War in 1831. The second battle was 1859 with John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry,
yes, and
the war ended in 1877 when federal troops were sent back to Washington from the southern Union camps. And so the actual war against slavery, WAS, 1831 to 1877. And for us to tell that story, that reframing of history, we have to be able to do that. And so Portsmouth Theater Academy is going to bring everyone from, young folks to seniors into our fold, and we're going to teach them how to take control of the narrative. Because for the last 150 years, the people who lost the Civil War have controlled the narrative, and that can no longer be allowed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ashe.
Anybody there?
Yeah,
Yes.
that was my enthusiasm resulted in clapping. Thank you. The reference back to being sure that we are telling a truly inclusive and complete history rather than the narrative that serves the power structure.
Exactly.
It's what I live for. So
and indeed, again, because it all started here, we have a responsibility, but an opportunity, I believe, to be able to tell the true story. Here at Fort Monroe, which is a big part of this 400th commemoration of those Africans who came ashore in August of 1619. They came ashore where Fort Monroe is located today. and were taken to Jamestown primarily as enslaved, as indentured servants who worked their contracts and ultimately gained freedom and were able to be, they were free blacks. So they were actually, I would say, the ancestors of the black middle class, because they were the ones who were able to work and have a craft and buy property and basically move themselves ahead. So to talk about the black middle class from the 18th century, 17th century, that's unheard of. History has not only been left out of the books, history has not even been thought about in terms of from the perspective of how to look at this history. So that's the first book in terms of 1619. Then 250-something years later, a little bit under 200 years later, in May of 1861, you had 3 enslaved men who got on a rowboat in Norfolk and made their way across the water to the Union camp at Fort Monroe, where they demanded asylum. They didn't say asylum, but that's what they meant. And when their owner came to collect his property, he was denied their return under a federal policy called the contraband of war, which meant that you could confiscate the property of the enemy, of which this Confederate slaveholder was the enemy. So the 3 men were not returned to him, but instead they were put on the federal payroll, which put them on the path to citizenship, which put them on the path to being a full American. And so within days, that was on May 23rd, by June 8th, you had dozens of men, women, and children, enslaved men, women, and children showing up at Fort Monroe, which became known as Freedom Fortress Monroe, and they to claim their citizenship and their freedom. So that's when slavery started to end in 1861. 1 month after things broke out at Fort Sumter, people were agitating for their freedom. So when you ask the question, was the Civil War about slavery or states' rights? Of course it was about slavery.
Yes.
And this is like the evidence of what happened when in that point in May of 1861, that black folks, enslaved people, started to be free at that point, 2.5 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. So this is a reframing of American history with the truth. And this is an opportunity, again, that we have here to tell this history, because it happened here. So if we don't tell it, no one will know about it. And so therefore, that's our job, is to tell this history. So to that end, on this coming Wednesday, June 19th, we will be at the Fort Monroe Theater, and we will be giving out the Junie Awards in those categories to those individuals and organizations that reflect the values that we believe are important, which again, our mission tells you is to help America heal from the legacy and the wounds of slavery without shame or blame.
Yes. Well done, Sherry. You know, I didn't mention that coming to the table, which Sherry and I are both members of, we took a pilgrimage down that way on June 8th for that reason. So we went to Fort Monroe, and this was my 3rd time going as well, and could hear the difference in the narrative.
Yes.
And I was just so pleased with the tour that we got, and they were telling the story with everything that you mentioned. They talked about General Butler. They talked about the 3 gentlemen that rowed themselves into freedom in the middle of the night. And again, 2 years ago, less than 700 days ago, the story wasn't told that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It is amazing that this, that it has worked the way that it's working, but I feel that Virginia is in a wonderful position to be a leader in terms of, again, sharing this history in a truthful way and looking at it from a new perspective. One of the things that was always troubled me about the contraband story when it would be told is that it was always told from the perspective of the Union General Benjamin Butler, that it was his, actions that kind of made the day. The fact of the matter is he wouldn't have had anything to do if not for the courage of the 3 men who escaped in the river and the rowboat and made their way to him. So to tell this story, narrative from the perspective of those 3 men changes the dynamic of how we receive this history and, receive the story. And so that's another part of what we're doing is we're training folks how to, look at this, history to understand it and to be, the researchers of it, to dig down and find out what's going on. I grew up, born and raised in Portsmouth, and left running after high school, never to return because it was so boring here. and then I get out into the world and realize, my goodness, that is kind of tells the story of the founding of the nation right there under your feet. And so when I returned to Virginia, I was just excited beyond words because there's all of this to research and to figure out. Hampton Roads was a major stop on the Underground Railroad because people would get to the auction block at Richmond and knew that if they went further south, the chances of escape were almost none. So Richmond was a big jumping off point to freedom, and they would come this direction through the waterways and to the Great Dismal Swamp. And those Underground Railroad routes have not been mapped out. You see the Civil War trail signs everywhere, but you don't see anything about Underground Railroad paths, routes, here, and that needs to be changed. And so that's the project that will create jobs for lots of people, but it needs to be done. And, the history doesn't recognize any boundaries of cities, towns, and counties. It's simply the history that happened in this area. And so I believe it can also be a connective way to bring some harmony and some interaction and working together among the cities, towns, and counties that make up Tidewater Hampton Roads.
And you are so right. And I'm going to throw in one other thing. This is a plug, since we're plugging so many things. As in Richmond now, we are just like a lot of the presidential nominees. We're talking about reparations and what that looks like. And we are defining it here in Richmond as repairing. It's a repertory act. It's repairing something that's broken. And so many people think that this whole remembrance thing is about, showing what Blacks haven't done, or how we haven't progressed, or what things that we may be lacking in the community. But when we look at the history and we are able to share our stories, we can really see the storyline of a very resilient population of people who have done, from day one, been not only enslaved, but in that process, fighting for freedom throughout that entire time until now, as we still do. So this is the story that I'm hearing now. And when I talk to young people, specifically, when they hear stories like that, Sherry, they go, "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that." It wasn't like we were slaves one day and then free the next, and then we just all marched into the sunset together. But it has been a constant, unanimous push through the last 400 years. Yes. To bring us to this point.
Yeah, and I find that young folks, when they do get this information, they get hungry for more.
Yes.
And a big part of what we do with the history plays is that we always have a post-show conversation after the play is performed, and we ask the audience, engage them in conversation about that. And I find that the students, particularly middle school students, are just the best audiences of all. They're just kind of they're interested in civics and history and all of that stuff that that they kind of don't like in classrooms. In fact, they often say that history is the most disliked, his academic subject.
Right.
And I love history, but when you start talking about dead people and dates, my eyes glaze over as well. So we've just got to find ways to, give, to present it that are interesting to folks, and that is what we can do when we do it with theater, when we do it with programs that are interactive with folks, having not to be just told stuff, but to actually experience them. And so, again, another great advantage that we have here in Virginia is that people should come and, access this history, in real time here, because it's here waiting to be discovered. You go out to Southampton County, where the Nat Turner insurrection happened, and there are, opportunities to take tours, and to interact with descendants of not only Nat Turner, but victims of the insurrection. And we've been out there and with the plays, and it's been tentative initially, but ultimately we've been able to achieve some really powerful conversations, and not people, shouting and being angry, but really just listening carefully to each other's, perspective. And that's what we need. We need to have those conversations happening on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
You're very welcome.
And Danita, both of you, just the stuff that you guys are bringing into this is it's very rich, and it's there's such a deep need for a better understanding of our history.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with a lot of folks running around with an incomplete idea about what their history contains, it really informs a lot of the behavior that we see day to day.
Yes.
And
right.
that
Mm-hmm.
when people know better, they do better. I like to think so anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And
really
I
appreciate
like
it.
that you, Stephanie, that you framed it as American history and not specifically African American history.
It's not.
Because it's all of our history, and it says a lot about the fabric of this nation.
Yeah.
And where we were and what we can be.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a big part of what I believe happens is that until we deal with the roots of slavery, we obviously can't move beyond that. And what we're doing is digging deep into the roots of it all. We would like to see Fort Monroe become an international venue for conversations about race and the development of anti-racist policies. This would be the perfect place to do it. One, symbolically, because of the history that happened here. This book ended by these two major events in American history: the 1619 arrival of that group of Africans who came by way of Angola, and then the 1861 contraband story. I mean, those are two powerful bookends that happened here in the geographical location of Fort Monroe. That's not by accident. That feels divinely inspired. So it's what better place to have an international venue where conversations about race and develop anti-racist policies should happen. Because what happens a lot of times is that we have these incredibly important news stories or incidents that happen, and they're in the headlines for a few days, and then they slip between the cracks. Mm-hmm. And they never to be referenced or looked at again. I mean, right now, today, in fact, it has been the anniversary of when the 9 people were killed in Emmanuel Church in South Carolina. And because that was a major, major event, that gets, that will be remembered in the history books. But unfortunately, there were many more church killings since then that have not received nearly the kind of attention that they need to in terms of their importance. And this is what we would do at Fort Monroe. We wouldn't let those stories slip through the cracks. We would make sure that every incident gets some light of day in terms of trying to understand what we can from why it happened and how we can prevent it from happening in the future.
Such important work.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I need to take a quick break and do a little station ID for anyone who has joined us since the last time I said it. Thank you so much for landing on 93.9 FM. This is the Work FM. We are in Midlothian and serving Chesterfield, Henrico, Richmond, Goochland, and Hanover. We're using community radio to build a bridge from city to county, from left to right, and from neighbor to neighbor. We thrive on your engagement and your support. We love it that you're watching the video. We love it that you're calling in. And we really love it when you guys hit that donate button and help us keep bringing you important information. This is what independent media looks like. If you'd like to be a part of it, if you'd like to learn more about producing it and creating it, get in touch. We'd love to have you. So we'll get back into the show. We are doing a celebration of Juneteenth tonight. For anyone who missed the very beginning of the show or hasn't heard of Juneteenth before, Juneteenth is a celebration of June 19th, 1865. It was on that day that the general of the army in Texas finally announced to still enslaved Americans that the Emancipation Proclamation had actually happened 2 years prior and
Mhm.
that they were now
Mhm.
free.
That's right. Mhm.
Yeah, think about that for a minute.
Yes, that's a
Because
lot.
that's, that was I think that was probably the first thing that I learned about Juneteenth was that.
Mhm.
And I was like, ew. Like, I'm so ew.
No back pay.
That's right. That's right.
How they got to June 19th. When Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9th, 1865, a couple weeks later, federal troops on horseback fanned out across the country, spreading the word that slavery had been abolished.
Mhm.
And wherever they got to, there would be a celebration, Freedom Day, Victory Day, Liberation Day, whatever they called it, but it's basically a celebration of the fact of the end of slavery.
Mhm.
And those celebrations became annual events in the localities over the years. So they're traveling along to announce the news, and they get to Galveston, Texas on June 19th. And because of the date on the calendar, it became known as Juneteenth, their particular celebration. And now Juneteenth is the generic term meaning to celebrate the end of slavery in North America. And it is recognized as a proclamation or a resolution in about 46 states. Yeah, the last that I heard, about 46 states. And of course, it's a state holiday in Texas. And the National Juneteenth Observation Foundation is working very hard to see Juneteenth become a federal holiday that would be celebrated in the way of a Flag Day. And so that is got a lot of energy behind it at this point. So that is the story of how we got to Juneteenth. And we'd like to see it. It's in some dictionaries here and there, but, it needs to get into Webster's or one of the huge dictionaries. And if we can make that happen in the next couple of years, I will be really quite pleased by that.
Well, I am foreseeing now since, I just came back from a conference last week, and it was a group of artists from all over the country, and talking about how media is like the oxygen to fire. And so we're at the time now where all of these small art projects are just sprouting up all over social media. When people are celebrating, they're dancing, they're writing songs, they're making films, they're doing documentaries.
Right.
All of these things are happening, and the media is taking notice of this literally all over the country, if not the world. Spreading the news of liberation.
It's really quite exciting because freedom, belongs to everyone.
Yes.
There's no human being that doesn't want to, have freedom. And of course, here in America, we exemplify what people believe. Freedom is all about the pursuit of the American dream. Everyone should have the right for the pursuit of the American dream. And in these times that we're living in now, we know that these things are in jeopardy.
Yes.
And so I think that's why Juneteenth is resonating so strongly for so many, because it is a precious gift and not to be taken for granted. And it is definitely it's in jeopardy at this point. And so we are feeling, that need to just kind of like, close in the ranks and make this relevant for everyone, because it is for everyone.
Absolutely. It really, especially now in our with our political leadership in the White House, I'll just say it like that. People are looking at the United States differently, and and you well know, last year we had a visit from an international news network that came from the Middle East, who had gone to many other places to look at liberation, slavery, emancipation, in other pockets of the world, and then decided that they were going to come here to see what we were doing in the United States. And Al Jazeera News Network came, and they went primarily through the South. They started here in Richmond, and went to Baltimore, went to Georgia, and down into that same same neighborhood, that place in Galveston in Texas, and was able to document where we were in 1865 and where we are now. And that documentary has been viewed by people literally all over the world. Some of them are wondering why we're still fighting the Civil War.
Really?
Right.
You can include me in that bunch.
Yes. But now we're looking at an age where we can even borrow things from other principalities around the world, and we can give each other different kinds of support. So we can vie for freedom for all people everywhere. It's a phenomenal time to be alive.
Yeah, I mean, it is. With what we're going to be doing on Wednesday, the 19th, in the Fort Monroe Theater, one of the art presentations, dance presentations, will be to show the life of those 20 and odd Angolians who came ashore in 1619. Yes. What was their life before they were kidnapped and, taken across the ocean on a torturous ocean journey? What was life when life was good? And so, because so often we start the narrative at the point of the kidnapping, and so as if they had no life before then, and they did. They had good lives, and family and friends, and jobs and lives that they lived, and that was taken away from them. And we want to see what that life was before them, which humanizes and makes real folks their stories in ways that are, we can't even calculate. So the opportunity here to be a leader and to help, help, not only America, but the world heal from, the legacy of oppression and manifest destiny, enslavement, all of those things that were used to build this country. I mean, the United States was, up until recently, without a doubt, the world's leader. Absolutely. And they did that on the backs of, with the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors, and, blood, sweat, and tears of the Native Americans who were crushed by the European invasion. And so we have to acknowledge that history truthfully, without anger or wanting to exact revenge, but to acknowledge it and to understand by acknowledging it, then we take away some of his pain and his hurt, and we're able to move forward. So we have a job to do. We are the leaders, and we were, the role models for up until, 2016. And, let's hope that we don't lose so much ground that we, having to start at square one again, once we have a different leadership. But we have to accept that as being a possibility.
Absolutely. And just to that fact, too, I really want to point out some of the allies that we have, European allies as well. When we went down to the Hampton University a week or so ago, we were given a fabulous tour of the Hampton Museum by Christopher Peters, who is, I think, a more new hire down there. But the history that you're talking about is as far as the 20 and odd. He gave us a presentation on that and where these folks actually came from, the English ship and the Dutch ship. And it was I would want you to go to that, Sherry. Go and listen and see, and tell me what you think. And since I'm talking about Hampton, of course, I have to mention Richmond as well. Michael Plum, who's community outreach specialist for us here in coming to the table in regards to the things that we do in the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. That museum has a phenomenal exhibition up now that's called Determined, that tells you the evolutionized story of the 400-year experience of Africans here in this country and African Americans. It really is phenomenal. I will say that they have been planning this exhibition for well over a year, maybe a year and a half. We were asked to come in last year and kind of look at some of the things that they were going to put in it, but it really truly is phenomenal. And the exhibition, Stephanie, doesn't even start on the inside of the museum. It starts on the outside. So even as you are driving down the boulevard, which is now, of course, the Arthur Ashe Boulevard, which even makes it more better. You know, it. I mean, you can't miss it. You really can't miss it. And
that sounds
it just
phenomenal. That sounds wonderful.
It is, and I'm just so proud that we are moving into this exhibition ship of being able to tell very unifying, very inclusive sort of stories. And this is what truth-telling in history is all about.
Yeah, it really is an exciting time right now in terms of all of this. We were blessed with a donation of a 17-foot rowboat that would be a replica of what the 3 contraband escapees used in their row across the water to Fort Monroe.
Wow.
And this is it's a fiberglass, but it looks like what they would have been in. So we're really excited to be able to get it all cleaned up and have folks, take their pictures with it and things of that nature. But, to bring that history and make it so tangible where you can touch it and, be a part of it. It's really kind of, you get a very spiritual kind of experience there because you kind of feel connected to the past in a very real way. And you also have visions of what can be done, in terms of moving forward. So we were really excited to get that donation, but it's been a boogabear to get it all we got to get it on the stage at Fort Monroe by Wednesday.
Yeah.
And just pray for us because it's been more than a notion to be able to get this done, but we're going to get it done. So we're going to have that boat on that stage on Wednesday, June 19th, I promise you.
Good for
That
you.
is so cool. Sherry, I just want to make sure that we have all the correct information about your event. So if there are people from the Richmond area that want to get down there to see it, that they know where to come to, when to come. So it's at the Fort Monroe Theater on Wednesday the 19th. What time should they come?
Right. And in fact, let me give the address before that. It's at 42 Tideball Road. Tideball is Tidball. 42 Tideball Road, which is, of course, in Hampton. And what has happened is that the Junie Awards will start at 6 p.m. as has been noted before. But one of our true leaders in the community, Mr. Hugh Harold III, passed away on yesterday.
Oh, my.
And Hugh was instrumental, in fact, in planning for the last, 6-7 months. He, I, and a gentleman named Nathan Richardson, who portrays Frederick Douglass, we have been the organizing team for this event on the 19th, and Hugh passed away on yesterday, and so we were going to have a memorial for him at 3 o'clock at the theater. So the memorial for Hugh Harold III will start at 3 p.m. at the Fort Monroe Theater, and then the Junie Awards will be presented starting at 6 p.m.
Okay.
And, it is with great sadness that that this has transpired in this way, and yet we're grateful that his passing happened before the 19th, so that we can honor him on Wednesday. And this is this is the life we've been given. These are the choices we've been given here. So that's the information for that. And if they have any questions, they can call the National Park Service at 757-722-3678. Again, that number is 757-722-3678, and that's the National Park Service at Fort Monroe.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sherry. I'm going to ask you to hang on. I don't want you to go yet if you're not done talking to us yet. But I do have another caller that I'd like to introduce, and her name is Amanda Davis. I went to a presentation last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, talking about understanding ACEs. And for those of you who haven't heard that term before, ACEs refers to adverse childhood events.
Experiences.
Mm-hmm. And there was a study done 25 years ago or so that indicated with a high enough incidence or a certain number of adverse childhood events that level of trauma would present with health complications later in life. That's what the study actually reflected. So I asked Amanda if she would call in and share some of her thoughts, since that's her field of expertise, kind of what that means for the African American community as the direct result of slavery.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hi, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Well, I think if you even just look at the life expectancy of residents who live in the East End, Churchill part of Richmond, as compared to those that live in the West End, there's almost a 30-year gap there, that residents that live in the more affluent part of the city, statistically live 30 years longer than those in the East End. A lot of that, I believe, goes back to historical trauma. It goes to generational poverty. It goes directly to lack of resources, adequate health care, inadequate nutrition, and all of those things, all of those systemic things are rooted really in slavery.
Wow, that's huge. I don't think I know that I had heard about the discrepancy in lifespan and certainly contemplated that on an individual basis. I don't think that I contemplated it on like an entire community when I think of, because we do still live in, unfortunately, in a lot of really segregated pockets. Mm-hmm. And so for those communities to be suffering.
Yeah, and the city is just still really segregated, and that's not, just regulated to Richmond, but even if you look at the demographics of even Chesterfield, and then having access. I know at one time I lived in Chester, and a lot of our things that we had to do, turning on our lights and paying bills, were all in northern Chesterfield, and so just even having access to do something like that, or living in communities where there are food deserts, and so you have a lot of corner stores, but you might not have access to, fresh vegetables that are affordable, and a lot of those things just really are historic and systemic and generational. You'll see in many of the housing project communities, many generations living in the same neighborhoods, and really not fully knowing how to access education or employment to be able to move, or feeling guilty if they do want to move, that they want something different than what they've been shown, not really having the support or knowledge base to access those things. So I think that there's been much research done about resiliency, and much research done about, historical racism, historical poverty and trauma, and just the impact that those things have even now as they trickle down into, our public schools.
And if I may, you're absolutely right. And Amanda, I'm just hoping that we have met before. I am artist in residence for the Virginia Department of Health Crater District. And a big part of my job is working in adverse childhood experience and generational and historical trauma. And I just wanted to mention, actually, if I may, to your listening audience, that the Craters District is hosting their Beyond ACEs Summit this summer, August 8th through 10th in Petersburg. And more likely it's going to be held at the Petersburg High School. And they have themed it around race, culture, and poverty. So, and that's truly where the dynamics that you're talking about, Amanda, show up most in health inequity, economic inequity, as it regards to our impoverished neighborhoods, and of course, not just in the Crater District, but all over. So yes, and I'm glad to hear that you are out here doing this work that's so important to African-centered people. And I hope that you come to the summit.
I will. I have the information, and so I will definitely be in touch.
Thanks.
I've worked in education for almost 20 years, and so I've spent quite a long time trying to build resiliency, not just with my students, but also with their families, and trying to introduce meditation and yoga and other kinds of mindful practices to communities of color.
Yes.
And to people who have been impacted by toxic stress in particular. I know that when you came to our workshop last week, Stephanie, we touched a little bit about epigenetics and things that your genes can carry along with you. And so I think that as the research there expands to look at more diverse populations, that we'll find that some of these things are also carried in our genetic code.
Yes.
And so thank you, again, for just having me here to speak with you all about this. It's an area that I'm very passionate about, that I see every single day. The influx of drugs into many urban African-American communities in the 70s and 80s, is a carryover from segregation and Reconstruction. All of those things dial back to each other. And so I am looking forward to continuing in this work with other people such as yourselves, so that we can hopefully break some of these cycles.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. And I wanted to toot your horn just a little bit more, if I may. Amanda has been setting up a mindfulness room. Is that correct? Is that what they call it? They called it a mindfulness room or
mindfulness room.
Mindfulness room at, is it Woodbridge?
At
Woodville on the south side.
There's so many schools. Too many schools for me to keep on top of. And that's one of the, that's like a part of something that's actually being rolled out throughout RPS. Is that the idea?
Yes, and I know that they're also doing some work in Henrico and also in Chesterfield, really just in this area, just investing more in looking at the social, emotional well-being of students. So I was fortunate enough this year to be a part of that experience at Woodville, and there are all sorts of organizations that have been involved, in the Tri-City area, such as CAN and Child Savers as well, at really looking more intently at student health and staff health, and how we can increase, personal resilience and decrease stress and burnout. So I'm very excited to see what's coming down the pike there.
That's awesome. Awesome. I appreciate the work that you're doing in the community, and I really appreciate you calling in to share the information, in particular about ACEs. I really wanted our listening audience to kind of have a much better feel for exactly what does that mean and how does that apply to this topic. Sherry, is there anything that you wanted to add about adverse childhood experiences and long-term stress or generational trauma?
Well, unfortunately, it's a little muddled in terms of what I'm hearing, Amanda, but I'm getting a sense of what she's doing, and I would like to say I think it's extremely important work. And here in Portsmouth, where we have a number of statistics that are quite troubling, we have a high infant mortality rate, and just found out a couple of days ago that the one hospital that we have in the city is no longer going to deliver babies, and so literally you will have to leave the city in order to be able to give birth to your child. So it is a city that has a high dropout rate for high school. So when you go around the city, you'll see signs of that are misspelled, and it just kind of filters everywhere. It impacts everyone when you have a community that's in crisis. Even those who are quote unquote doing okay, they're impacted by the fact of that there is such disparity in the community. So to be able to deal with those issues and to be able to provide tools for people to be able to lift themselves out of those situations is very important, and I'm excited to hear that this is being done, and look forward to being able to find out more and find out ways to be able to bring some of that research and work to Portsmouth, because we desperately need to be able to deal with these horrible statistics. We have like one of the highest rates of HIV contraction for Black women here in Portsmouth, and this can't. And what happens a lot of times is that the city, leaders don't want to have that information public, because that makes them look bad. But that means they want to sweep it under the rug, and that's just not going to be the answer, obviously. So it's a hard road to row there, but to the fact that, again, that Amanda is out there doing this kind of work, it gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's difficult when you tell people to pull themselves up by the bootstraps when they don't even have any boots.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we can't continue to work in silos and continue to offer suggestions without offering solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Hallelujah.
So I have a question for you, Amanda, since so much of what we've been talking about on the show tonight has been about truth telling in history and sharing stories and looking at the history differently, even the history that we teach our children. Do you think that this avenue that we're going down with truth telling will have, an effect on helping us to take some of the trauma out of African American communities?
I do. I also believe that many of our people in the community don't even realize that some of these experiences are, for lack of a better word, are abnormal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so their truth is very different than what my truth may be. I think it's very telling when you sit down with families, parents, students, and start talking about life experiences. And we don't, I provide training and workshops throughout the country, and I never give people like the AIDS questionnaire or anything like that, because I feel like that can be sort of opening up old wounds, and it can also be traumatic in that kind of space. But just allowing them to see even what the questions are, not taking it themselves, but seeing what the questions are and what is considered trauma according to this survey. And it's very disheartening to come in contact with people that don't even realize that some of these things are traumatic.
Right.
And don't even realize, like, a conversation came up about spanking, and even spanking in the community, and what positive and appropriate discipline looks like in some communities may vary from others. But then when you start talking about brain science and, okay, well, you don't feel like your parents were abusive, but what did it make you feel like to be in that circumstance? And you start talking about things like the cortisol is still spilling out into your brain, even if you thought that was coming from a place of love. Just having those kinds of conversations, I think, push this envelope a little bit further. I think you first have to know that you're traumatized in order to deal with it. And unfortunately, there's quite a bit of trauma that's related to poverty. But if poverty is all you know, you may not even recognize some of these experiences being traumatic or adverse to your childhood.
And I agree with you totally. And I'm so happy that one of my sheroes, Dr. Joy DeGrew, will be at the summit in August, because she has been talking about trauma in the African American community for, I would dare say, 20 years, and getting to now to the place where of not only prominence, because she's been prominent in the African American communities and communities of color for a very long time, but being heard as a real game changer when it comes to adverse childhood experience. And as some people work more with children, and I do work a lot with children when it comes to ACEs. But you know what's really painful about this work for me, Amanda, is dealing with not the children but the seniors, the elders who suffered, trauma as young children, and as you mentioned, through epigenetics as well, that trauma, and have been able to now look back at their life and over the last 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years and being able to reevaluate some of the stories in their life and say, oh, well, that's why I respond that way. That's why I made that kind of decision. That's why I made those choices. And as you say so eloquently, not realizing that they have lived very traumatic lives, and these things are not normal.
No. And the mantra of, Black women don't get depressed.
Yes.
It's harmful.
Right.
I was raised that no matter what, you still went to work. There was no self-care.
Right.
It was, you still have to carry your own purse. You still have to take care of your family. You still have to push through, even on days that you may not feel like it. And so those things can be very harmful, and even convincing someone that they need mental health support.
Right.
I was talking to some men in Churchill community last week who, some were former students, I used to be a high school teacher, about fatherhood and what it means to be a father and not having the strongest role models when they were growing up. Many of my former students' parents had substance use issues, or just lacked the knowledge or experience to parent their children in a way that they wanted to continue. But how do they even access groups like that as an adult? Do those conversations and groups exist? Who do you contact when you're a man and you feel, anxious, or you feel like you're not able to support your family in the way that you want, and you're having to do things in the community you might not really want to do, but you lack the education to be able to do anything else. And so, even for finding supports for young adults in that avenue to be able to break some of these cycles, I've just found in my experience can be a bit challenging.
Wow. I just really appreciate all of the information that you have made available to our listeners tonight, Amanda. It's just tremendous. I need to take a quick break just to do a station ID for folks because we're a little past the top of the hour. If you have joined us since the last time I told anybody about it, you're listening to WRWK 93.9 FM. My name is Stephanie. This is In the Frequency of Hope, and you're listening to The Work FM. The Work FM is community radio, and we are using it to build a bridge from city to county, from left to right, and from neighbor to neighbor. We are serving Chesterfield, Henrico, Richmond, Goochland, and Hanover. And tonight we are celebrating Juneteenth. Tonight I have in the studio with me Danita Green, and on the lines right now I have Sherry Bailey and Amanda Davis. Information talking about the history of Juneteenth and adverse childhood experiences, getting a little more deeply into talking about really telling the truth of our history as Americans, and what that looks like when we talk about an inclusive history. And it's been a really powerful conversation so far. I have big questions that I want to ask of folks based on some of the things that I've been hearing, if that's okay. So one of the things that came up this weekend when I attended the event that was put together by the Alegba Folklore Society, they did mention reparations. And you've just mentioned reparations. We've talked a little bit about it, that it's coming around. It's not that we've never heard of it before. It comes around occasionally, but
and it goes
it's actually coming around in terms of the presidential candidates that are running for 2020. And I know that there's one in particular that really got my interest due to talking about that. And I just kind of wanted to get a feel for, I know that, like, in particular, Coming to the Table, I believe, has actually put together a list, and we're going to be actually producing something a little bit later that gives a really full picture of what that's like. But if you want to go ahead and share that with folks tonight, we can start.
You
We
want
can
to
talk
start
a
with
little
the
bit.
ladies on?
Sure.
Okay.
So anybody jump in, whoever wants to, talk about what that looks like for you. What does, how would you like to see reparations take place in the United States? We have a couple of other good models to follow. And then of course we have our own ideas. How does that look to you?
Well, actually, I will start.
Okay.
Because part of what is Amanda, are you still on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I know you're very aware about the decision that the the health department head in Milwaukee put in place, I guess maybe 10 days ago, and that is to declare racism and race inequality a public health issue. And by doing so, it has brought not only race inequity, but also reparations on the tongues of people who are in leadership in city, state, and even federal now government. That the disparaging aspects of race inequity lend themselves to an unhealthy population. And in order to turn that dynamic around, you have to literally repair some systems that are in place that hold not only people of African descent, but people who live under the poverty level in a place of not being able to repair themselves or to live healthy lifestyles. I think that in itself is a huge addition to this story about where we are, that we can now see, and just everything that you said, Amanda, not only ties itself to racism, but now to the public welfare of whole cities across the United States. So,
Absolutely. I would also like to see, we have a generation of people, including myself, who are being crippled by student loan debt.
oh my goodness, yes.
And unable to access or create any type of generational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's such a heavy burden of student loan debt, and so many first-generation college students and their parents who take out Parent Plus loans
Mm-hmm.
really have no way to access college because it's not affordable
Right.
without taking out loans. And you're asking people to really sign up for a lifetime commitment when they're 17, 18. And so anything related to making college more affordable or some type of relief from student loan debt, because it can be pretty heavy, especially if you go to a public college like I did. For me, I would like to see that included in some type of reparation package, because I think that also contributes to that public health crisis that you just spoke of, when you're having to make decisions about healthy eating, living somewhere that's safe and affordable, but then you have this balloon payment that you have to make every month. And unable to purchase a home that you could pass on to your children, or even have life insurance in many cases. I think that that's something that also should be pulled into that conversation. And I thought it was amazing what the gentleman did at Morehouse College.
Oh, yes.
During graduation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the way, that we pull people out of poverty.
Absolutely.
There's so many jobs that aren't even.
I'd like to share. I just a couple days ago had a conversation with someone who was impacted by what Georgetown University has done, which is they research industry.
Sherry, hang on for a second.
Yes.
Hang on just 1 second, because Amanda's not quite done. I know you guys are
I'm
having
sorry.
trouble hearing each
I
other. Hang on
apologize.
just 1
My
second. Go ahead,
apologies.
Amanda.
Yes, so when you're graduating from college, you then come out with this $50,000 debt over your head. So even adding that to the conversation is something that I hope will come out on this campaign trail.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Sherry, go ahead.
And I apologize, Amanda. Like I said, you're really kind of muffled for me, so I apologize. About Georgetown University, they've done their research and into their, the fact that enslaved people built their institution. And what they've done is that now they are providing full scholarships for the descendants those folks who built that institution. And that's, to me, an example of what reparations should look like. It will be not, handing everybody 40 acres and a mule, but, something equivalent to that in terms of giving them resources and tools to be able to live better, to make better lives for themselves, to be able to, become entrepreneurs and, professionals in whatever areas that they are interested in doing so. And, again, a plug for Fort Monroe being in a venue for where these kind of conversations and policies can be developed, I believe is really necessary, because it's fine that these things are happening case by case, but we need a collective effort to be able to make sure that it happens, across the board. And I think, as Anita said, it's not just African Americans, descendants of the enslaved, but all folks who are marginalized and oppressed, who need some support. Everyone who deserves to be able to have that access to those resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you brought up a really wonderful point. Thank you for mentioning the Georgetown group, and Stephanie, thank you for bringing us to the topic of reparations, which is definitely our campaign at Come to the Table RVA, for starting now to however long it takes, because we are very, very well aware that it is not just a singular action. We're bringing America to a different place of seeing, being, and doing. That is actually going to be good for everyone. But when you mentioned Georgetown, I think the significant occurrence in that Georgetown University situation is that this was an effort that didn't necessarily start in the hallowed halls of the system of Georgetown. This was something that happened with the student body, who made the decision that they did not want to go on and not repair, can I dare say it again, not repair the community of people who built the school in which they attended. So I think the exact monetary amount was $27 per semester for each student that they would willfully be able to contribute to a scholarship fund that would make way for the descendants of enslaved Africans to benefit from this wonderful education. And I think that's really, really important, because even though we are looking for systemic change, we're always looking for our government to do something. That is truly, dare I say it again, I don't believe that's going to happen unless the public climate changes on this subject. Mm-hmm. People have to be able to look at this and see it as the abhorrence that it is, that we have totally ignored separate but equal populations in our city, and need to be able to realize that when we repair this group, that we will all function better as a united America. And these young people at Georgetown saw the vision and were able to speak up and wanted to be a part of this conversation. So I truly commend them.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I guess what I would like to see it more institutionalized in terms of doing these kind of things, because at Georgetown, there was probably some dynamic, motivated student leaders who decided that this was going to be a cause that they were going to fight for.
Absolutely.
And they did it, and they won. Right. And unfortunately, that's not the case at every institution that needs to do that, because at UVA, after what happened at Charlottesville, the same kind of conversations, got started, but they kind of didn't go anywhere, Right. It needs to be at all of these universities and colleges and so forth like that. And it's kind of, at this point, it's kind of dependent on the cult of personality, I feel, and that is not the strongest way to be able to achieve the goal. But, we'll take it where we can get it.
Right.
I know that one of the ways, in terms of the first time that I had a real serious conversation about reparations, where someone actually said something that made sense to me in terms of how to do it, was our dear friend Martha Rollins coming to the table, who we were in a breakout group at one of the national meetings, and her suggestion for reparations looked a lot like what it looked like after World War II, when there was the GI Bill.
Yes.
For those returning soldiers to be able to buy houses, get education, and basically, again, acquire the tools necessary to succeed in life. And the way that she laid it out, it was a revelation. I'll never forget. We were sitting in our breakout session was like under the stairwell somewhere in the building, and she said that, and it was just like a light bulb went on off in my head there in terms of, that seems like the way to go.
Yes. And thank you for mentioning Martha and bringing her into the conversation. She's my co-founder and cohort here in Richmond. And people tell us all the time the two of us are just formidable together here. So
indeed you are.
Yes.
Indeed you are.
So, but she definitely brings a flavor, and she has a good head on her shoulders and has been fighting this part of the Civil War for Richmond for a very, very long time. And she does have some fabulous ideas about how we can start where we are and also work in the systems to create change. And we had just a wonderful event in May that featured Ken Woodley, who is the author down your way of in Williamsburg, the author of The Road to Healing, a civil rights reparations story in Virginia, in Prince Edward County, where we all know the story about the children in Farmville that didn't go to school for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And he was deeply disturbed by that. And during that time, he was an editor of I want to say the Daily Press or the Daily Herald, the local newspaper there. And he worked with the Virginia General Assembly to be able to repair what was broken in that school system. And the government gave reparation money to those children who are now, of course, well grown, but still they were able to catch up on education, and they were repaired in some ways. So it can be done. It can be done. And that's just one example, but I'm hoping to see a lot more especially as we approach the 2020 election.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Well, I think that's going to be super interesting when we start to hear maybe different ideas about how it works, because the whole idea of it, sort of what I've seen thus far really tends to get people off in a direction about whether or not they should.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And frequently people never get to how do we implement.
Right.
Because really, that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently, if you can explain to people how it's going to work, then they'll stop resisting, because if they can't see it in the first place. So that's going to lead to my next question for everybody, however it is that you want to see it. But I pulled up some information from one of the candidates who is running, because she is the only one I've heard that's given a very specific plan.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go ahead and read directly from her website what she's talking about in terms of reparations. And I know I've heard her speak at length about this, so there's probably deeper information. But what I'm finding here, she proposes between 200 and 500 billion, and that's billion with a B, folks, plan for reparations for slavery. That money to be dispersed over a period of 20 years. An esteemed council of African American leaders would determine the educational and economic projects to which the money would be given. And that's really the clearest, I think, that she's really at least put in print thus far about her plan for reparations. But I think it's lovely because she was the first person I heard talking about it on the national scene for the 2020 election cycle, at least. And she's the only person that I heard talking about specific numbers of dollars.
Right.
So I would like to.
This is Marianne Williamson.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And so I'd just like to hear from any of you, kind of, what do you think? Where are you at with somewhere between 200 and 500 billion toward reparations to the African American community, the descendants of slavery?
Well, first I'm going to say, I worked on Obama's campaign, but Marianne Williamson is the first candidate I've ever actually taken out my wallet and given a donation to. And the reason is because, not solely because she's a woman, although I think that's awesome too, but because she comes from a spiritual place of global spirituality and being able to see the big picture. And she is willing to just jump over all of the train tracks and carve her own path. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that as a nation, we have too much time for any much of the same status quo kind of politics that we've had in the past. I think it's going to take somebody that's really thinking way out of the box in order for us to get out of the box that we're currently in. So, yay, Marianne.
Okay.
It's definitely not going to be business as usual in terms of moving forward. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting in terms of, because I think Berta O'Rourke also has spoken about reparations, yes, but not, I guess, on the same scale that Williamson has done. Before you asked the question, Stephanie, in fact, I was going to make the comment about the fact that I'm fascinated by the folks who, when you talk about reparations, get angry and tell you, mm-hmm, and I'm talking about Black folks actually, who just are feeling like, I don't need a handout or anything of that nature, and just kind of not understanding how, this generational kind of oppression impacts everyone, and that, even if you don't personally feel it in your daily life, you're still impacted by it. But I've actually been in conversations with, they tend to be older
yes,
folks who just the idea of reparations seems to them to be like you're begging for, like you're taking a handout, and that you're being lazy because you can't figure out how to do it yourself. And so those are folks who you would never even get to talking about numbers or anything like that, because they're so adamant in terms of just kind of like the whole idea of reparations not being a good thing. And so now let's go to talking about the numbers in terms of all of that. And those numbers make almost, no sense to me. So when they talk about the deficit, the federal deficit and so forth like that, and $10 trillion and stuff like that, it doesn't compute for most people. So it's certainly not for me. And so I think that in terms of reparations, that it's going to be a process of educating folks about why reparations are necessary. And if you're not, for that, then that's okay. But for the rest of us who think that they're necessary, why be opposed to people being able to access that? So right. I guess what my final answer here is that the educating folks in the process of making reparations a reality, they need to go hand in hand. And there are very few folks who are trained to do that, but I think like the work that Amanda's doing would be a great model by which people could be able to figure out, how to make reparations a reality. But I think that's a big part of what's going to happen, the education on both sides, those who are crafting the policies and those who will be the recipients of those policies. We all need to be educated a lot more than we have been up to this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we always talk about reparations as being something for Black people. And again, we always talk about money, but a big part of repairing our current situation is just the acknowledgement that the wound exists for those who would need to be forgiven, to ask for that. Not everyone does, but we meet people at the table all the time who this is not solely a conversation that goes on with African Americans or African Americans with European Americans. This is a conversation that goes on in European American households, where I talk to so many people who uncover racist histories, really defileable acts that have happened within their generational lines, and want to be able to, well, not quite erase, but to at least in some ways amend and change the scope and history of their own genealogy, their own families, and want to contribute something to the healing of this nation. So
if you look at it, I completely agree with you. If you look at even like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was developed after the apartheid, and the work that was done there, but just the restoration of relationships for even the most egregious act. So for me, reparations isn't just, like you said, it isn't just a financial aspect. It's repairing the harm that was done and restoring the community.
all right. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, and in that, I wanted to say, since we've already discussed her once, we'll just go ahead and do it again. It was really delightful to be at the speaking engagement. You know, Marianne Williamson did a tour around the United States for a year prior to announcing her candidacy for president.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to see her when she came here to Richmond. She started in Richmond very intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
For those who aren't familiar with her or who haven't heard her story, she started that tour in Richmond very intentionally because she refers to Richmond and Central Virginia as being the site of the original wound of America.
Mm-hmm.
And that day in the auditorium of Huguenot High School with about 700 or 800 other people, we all held hands while she read the prayer that she wrote in her book, Healing the Soul of America, which is a healing prayer that's meant to be shared with folks. So everybody in the auditorium was holding hands, and she asked those of us who are wearing white skin to look into the eyes of those of us who are wearing black skin and repeat after me. And first there was an apology, and then there was a prayer.
Right.
And it was such a moving experience. It was, wow. I mean, it was powerful being there. Ron was there that day too.
Indeed, I was. It was very powerful.
Anyway, so that is one of the things that I think, and largely the work that I've gotten involved with Unity of Justice. That's the same kind of work that we're doing, is getting in there and giving people the opportunity to own their story.
Beautiful.
And when you're able to share that with another person and have the other person see and acknowledge and even embrace your humanity around whatever conflict you may have, finding the other side of that conflict in such a way that can be mutually beneficial to everyone, as opposed to there having to be a winner and a loser.
Absolutely. Right.
So I think that sort of perspective would serve us well when we consider ideas about addressing the harms of our past and how do we move forward.
Right. And, as long as we're the other, things are not going to change. And finally, a plug about coming to the table. Coming to the table is all about, as the name implies, people coming together and building relationships, which, we have people of all races and nationalities in this country. I think that we all suffer from having some kind of misled narrative about each other. But when you actually are in relationship with somebody, when you sit down and break bread with them, when you talk to them, when you listen to their story, when you share yours, when you weep together and celebrate together, then you want to be a part of their success. You want to be a part of their comeuppance, or you want to be a part of their next chapter, because that also makes you feel good. That's really what this conversation is about at our table. And it makes the idea of reparation so much easier. It makes sense when the person isn't somebody that you don't know, or it's just like you feel like you're just oceans apart from each other. But if it's somebody that you can see as you see yourself, then it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, I know that we're. Go ahead, Sherry. I'm sorry.
I wish we could have a coming to the table chapter in every city and town and county, because
We're working on it.
really allows people that you really have to have a personal relationship in order to have these conversations. This is really difficult topics and issues to unravel, and it's better to do it with someone who you know on a first name basis as opposed to a stranger who you have no information about, because it's not about trying to convince the other person of your way of thinking. It's simply about trying to make sure that you hear what they believe and that they hear what you believe, and then you kind of, work your way, down the road on all of that. And coming to the table creates that synergy where people are able to present their best and truest selves in terms of talking about these issues, and we need that. So a plug for coming to the table everywhere.
Yes, I love your mission. I truly do. And I want to make sure that we, before we go tonight, get information on whatever the next meeting is. We'll include that in the live stream so that information will be available to all listeners.
Okay.
About your organization and how they can get involved. Sherry, I'd kind of like to ask you the same thing. Is there anything else that's going on in the Hampton Roads area beyond June the 19th that you want to make our listeners aware of?
Well, the big focus here is in August, there will be the grand opening of the new visitor center at the Casemate Museum, which is at Fort Monroe. And the Casemate Museum tells the story of the Union forces in the Civil War, and also the contraband story. So that's going to be the weekend of August 23rd through the 25th in terms of lots of activities and so forth like that. But as we kind of move throughout the year, they're doing lots of little programs, little in terms of just not lots of, staff needed for that. Like they have campfire conversations with Frederick Douglass. And, Frederick Douglass made a famous speech called "What Does the 4th of July Mean to a Slave?" And, so throughout the year, they're, creating situations where there are conversations about the history in ways that are kind of different and hopefully accessible to folks. And so the August 23rd, 25th date is like a big date, and everybody's kind of focused on that. So I will definitely send more information to you guys so that you can share it with your listening audience.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you. I need to do another quick station ID because we've actually have passed a whole other half hour. This is WRWK 93.9 FM in Midlothian, Virginia. My name is Stephanie. You're listening to In the Frequency of Hope. Tonight we are celebrating Juneteenth. My guests are Danita Green, who's here in the studio, and on the line I have Sherry Bailey and Amanda Davis. We have covered a whole lot of different things so far tonight, and we're not done because we've still got time, and there's still so much to talk about. Such a deep and rich conversation. I do want to share with folks a little bit about the experience that I had this weekend. So on Saturday, the Alegba Folklore Society actually put on a 3-part event this weekend. So they had something on Friday, a couple of things going on Saturday, and then they had something else on Sunday. And I went to what fit into my schedule, which was Saturday evening. So I went to this field that's next to, obviously a part of the James River Park system, but it's a part of it that I never even knew it was there before. When I put it in my GPS and then I turned off and there was a gravel road, I was like, oh dear, where are we going? What's happened now? Anyway, so I got there and, there were people out in the field. There were a couple of vendors left, which was really good because I got a snack. And then they came out and they did this amazing performance. It involved they had some really neat costumes and some drumming. There was this amazing singing and chanting going on, which I did record for you guys. However, the technical difficulties that presented themselves between Saturday evening and today prevented me from having it prepared to share with you on tonight's show. However, we intend to get that on air for you this week, so that you'll be able to hear a little bit about what happened this weekend if you weren't able to attend. Anyway, so they did this amazing performance, which involved dances, and some of it was theatrical, in which Ms. Bell played the part of a woman whose son was being sold away from her. It was powerful. It was really powerful to see folks in the crowd reacting. Yeah. And I don't, that's definitely one of those. I mean, you can hear about it. Sure. We can tell you the same story. Being there had its own, like there was a lot of this presence that it was powerful. I don't know what else to say other than it was really powerful. And then from there, we all met a little closer to the river. And then we lined up single file and we walked silently along this path. And there were people mixed in with our group that were carrying torches, and that was the only light available. Now, I tried to imagine what this would have been like, 400 or even 250 years ago, or anywhere along the line where there wasn't a rail, because I could actually hear the train running.
Yes.
And on the opposite side of me, I could hear traffic, so I didn't have that sense of, like, I was trying to imagine, when you talked about earlier this evening, Sherry, when you talked about what that experience must have been like for the first 20 Angolans who arrived, here in Virginia and then were sold into slavery. I tried to imagine what that must have been like to have arrived after horrific conditions, not speaking the same language, and then being manacled to a line of other people and then driven at night in the dark through the woods to, I don't know what that location is at the other end, but all of it sounds incredibly terror. I mean, it just sounds like a nonstop state of terror.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I think that we have done a poor job of relating when we do talk at all about the history in America, is the systemic terror that was built into this system that today is defended in terms of economics.
Right.
And every time that somebody says to me, oh, yeah, but you got to look at it, all wars are economic. And I'm like, yeah, but no, really. Like, really.
This is right.
No, really. You got to dig a little bit deeper. And I think one of the reasons that I felt so called to put this show together tonight, and I'm just really excited to have you all join me and talk about this, is because these are the kinds of things that we avoid. Talking about. It's really uncomfortable to confront that history. Much like it's very uncomfortable for people who have whatever their conflict may be to come together and decide that we're going to sit here and we're going to talk about this until we work it out. No, it's not necessarily a good time while you're doing it, but what you get on the other side is so good that it makes it worth it. There's a saying that I love, that successful people are willing to subject themselves to something uncomfortable.
Yes.
In the interest of growth.
Yes.
Successful people don't do it just for fun. And if we expect success on the other side, we must know that there will be discomfort between here and there. Okay?
Right. You're so right. You're so right.
Anyway, so again, ladies, I just really appreciate all of you being willing to come in and celebrate Juneteenth itself, celebrate freedom, but also take a look at what is it that we're commemorating, what is it that we're memorializing, and really sharing that story, that very complex story, with all of its less than comfortable feelings attached to it.
Right.
You know, and I think so much of the work that each of us does in our own way is really geared toward that, like helping people get to that place, claim that story, know who you are, and then what do you do with it? And bringing that forward so that we can all bring this closer together as a community.
Absolutely. So we're definitely at the what do we do with it part now. This is where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephanie, you brought up some really profound points. And I don't think people really realize that the slave trade not only built this country and this economy,
Mm-hmm.
but it built economies all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So without a thank you. This conversation on reparations would be a way of saying thank you. We hear you, we see you, we know, and we want to be able to embrace not only the African American culture, but other cultures that have come here to build this country, and move to a different definition of what the United States really is.
Mm-hmm. That would be beautiful.
That would.
Evolve, you mean?
Yes, evolution, evolve, yes. Sounds lovely, doesn't it?
Wow.
Indeed.
Wow.
Mhm.
So I just took a peek. We are getting into the tail end of the show. We've got about 15 minutes. So I want to make sure that I give each of you the opportunity to share any closing thoughts tonight with our listeners, whether it's about Juneteenth or if it's about reparations or whatever it is. But I want to, again, give each of you the opportunity. Amanda, are you still there?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that you would like to share tonight with our listeners on this topic, or that gets a little bit more into your area, whether it's ACEs or working with children and resiliency?
Well, just first, thank you again for having me on to just speak about ACEs and childhood trauma. Angel and I will be repeating the workshop that you attended last week because it went so well. We got so many requests to come back. So
Right.
If anyone is interested in attending, we'll be doing that on July 9th at Elwood Thompson. But just, if anyone is curious about ACEs or the impact that has on your overall health, I'm always open for emails, calls, conversations. But there's a wealth of knowledge out there about it as well, and there's a lot of good work being done throughout Metro Richmond about the impact that toxic stress is having on students.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to call in and be a part of this tonight.
Thank you so much.
Sherry? Sherry, are you still there? Oh no, Sherry, are you still there?
She's still, well,
Okay.
I don't know.
it's still off the hook.
It still is? Okay, maybe she's just stepped away for a minute.
Okay.
then. Okay, thank you. She'll come back. Well, I want to invite everybody to coming to the table.
Yes.
I really do, and especially as we go forth in what I say reframing and defining reparations for RVA. And as Sherry was so eloquent in describing what we do, we don't just come and sit down over food. Let me just say that first. We have facilitated conversation, and that begins with creating a safe space. We know that coming to the table is a group about racial healing, and the people that we attract to that conversation are people who are looking to unload some things, but also to walk away with some new things, some ideas to be able to share. And they're looking for a open, congenial, and safe space to do that sharing. So a coming to the table meeting would be people at large round tables, maybe 6 or 7 people, sometimes 8 at a table. One of those people is a facilitator who's masterfully, I like to use that word, masters conversation to help people to build a safe space, make sure that people know that they are, what they say at the table is confidential, so we don't take anything out. No one comes to to be the representative of their entire race. Your conversation, yeah, right, exactly, right. It's great. All right, you come and you tell your own story. You tell your own story, and you share, and you do. You speak, but you do very intentional listening. It's your opportunity to be in a safe space. It's confidential, and you can hear stories and share stories. And you can do that. We get together. Our dinner gatherings meet once a month, but we have 3 dinner gatherings that happen. The large group is on, I won't say hiatus right now, but we are doing the deep dive ourselves into the reparations project so we can come back strong for our family reunion in September. But we have smaller groups, and I would encourage that anybody who comes now to come to the table, you can come to the great big meeting that has 80, 90 people to it, but start in a small group. So we have a dinner group that meets on the second Wednesday of the month. It is a collaboration between Coming to the Table and the Joyful Feast. And it's just that, a Joyful Feast, oh my gosh, John Vest is an incredible chef, and he usually creates the food himself, and we come together with him and have conversation and some excellent food. And that meeting moves a little bit, but it's centered in downtown Richmond. Then we have another group that we call the New Initiative. This actually started out being more of a male affinity group because we realized that men have different kinds of conversations sometimes than women. That's the most sexist thing you'll hear me say, but because I have a house full of sons, I know this is true. So, but it started out being that way, but now it's more family oriented, where you have male, female, and even teenagers come, and that one meets at Fox and Hound off of Huguenot Road. So you can come and you can play shuffleboard and throw darts, and you can not at anybody.
That's awesome.
And play pool, and you can have a deep dive conversation on topics that really matter.
And you said that's called New
Initiative.
New Initiative.
And I'm going to give you a few addresses where you can get on our website and our mailing list so you can get some more information. We also have a book group that meets every month, and we tackle a new book. We give it a good read, and then of course we discuss what we learned over food, over racial lines. And that group has sometimes, well, actually I think it has as many as 75 people on the list that come to that. And we also have a movie group, because there's so many things happening in cinema, so many things happening even in our movie theaters, but also Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. All of these shows are available to us, all dealing with race constructs and issues. We watch those. We, pass the nachos, and we talk about those things too. So we have really a lot of really small groups. So how do you get in contact with us? Of course, you can go to a Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, you can go to Coming to the Table or CTTT RVA on Facebook. If you would like to email us and get on our mailing list, it is info@cttt-rva.com. And I'll say that again, if I may. info@cttt-rva.com. Thank you. And also, we have our own our website. You can go to comingtothetable.org and learn all about us from the guys of our national organization. Coming to the Table is actually a 12-year-old organization. We started the Richmond chapter. There were about 6 of us. I say about 5 years ago. Some people say it was 4. I say it was 5. But we started in Martha Rollins's living room with 6 of us, and now we engage with over 600 people a month, every month.
That's awesome.
Most of that is online, but we share a plate with 250 people just about every month. People are just on fire about these conversations.
It's time.
It is time. So, and you can also go to my personal site, DanitaRoundtreeGreen.com, and go to Courageous Conversations. That's the page, Courageous Conversation, that I've dedicated on my website for conversations about reparations and what we're doing here in the Richmond area, and really defining it. If you go to the national site, go to resources, and you can go to our National Reparations Guide. And this is a great project for people to do over the summer. Our Reparations Guide is 21 pages of really thoughtful ideas on how to introduce reparations to your family, in your communities, your workplace. And if you work at for a government office and want to do something systemic, it has ideas and concepts that can work across the board wherever you are. So it's a reparations guide that's on the National Coming to the Table website. Download that, change your life this summer, and then come back and meet us at Ginter Park Presbyterian Church on the 3rd Tuesday of September, which it's kind of like our homecoming, and it's our family reunion, and we would love to have you be members of our family at the table.
Yes, you need to spell out Roundtree.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. The other thing you can do, I'm known as the storyteller on a mission. So if you go to Storyteller on a Mission, I'll pop up there too. At least I should. But Danita, Danita. Roundtree is ROUNTREE. Last name's Green, GREEN.com. You'll find me. I'm there.
Awesome.
I'd like to share that I have a book that's being published, and Abolitionist Museum is a play that features 8 historical figures who are living in a wax museum. When the museum curator brings in a Confederate flag, they debate whether or not to burn that flag. And so that play, we did it most recently in front of the Confederate Monument in downtown Portsmouth. And it was well received, because what we always do is we ask the audience at the end of the play, okay, you are a figure who lives in this wax museum. What would your vote be, to burn or not to burn the flag?
Yes.
And the conversation is always interesting. And so I'm really proud and excited about the fact that that book is finally published, and it will be available for purchase on Wednesday, June 19th at the Junie Awards. So we are excited about that, as well as the fact that Juneteenth seems to be spreading across the country. There are chapters in all 50 states, and we on Saturdays we have a conversation with Juneteenth organizers from around the country. So Saturdays at 1 o'clock, we are on the phone talking about what's going on in other places, and I fully expect that by 2020, we will have all 50 states with some sort of Juneteenth legislation, and I believe that it's also possible that we will be a federal holiday by that time in 2020. So things are looking bright despite all that's going on around us at this point. We're feeling quite hopeful. One of the things that I was thinking of when you were speaking last, Stephanie, in terms of what you were saying, is that democracy is always in opposition to capitalism. So this is a capitalistic country that we live in, and it is very much, in contrast to what democracy offers, equality for all. Capitalism is profit for the few, and so that is kind of part of the culture of America, and we best understand that as a way of being able to actively fight it. Because if democracy is in danger of capitalism, then we need to understand how we work with that, because obviously capitalism is not going to go away, but we got to figure out a way for it not to be quite so oppressive in terms of that people living their lives in fair and equitable ways.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I want to thank you for making this conversation happen, and I'm really thrilled to have been able to share the microphone with Nita and Amanda. Thank you all very, very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Love
you so much,
Sherry.
I appreciate you being here.
Appreciate that.
So I want to give folks who are here in the Richmond area just a couple of pointers, a couple of tips. I think it was a very powerful experience to go out and do that walk with a group. But that doesn't, I don't think it would take anything away necessarily for someone to go ahead and take that walk alone and just to see what that space is like, what that feels like. And then I'm going to suggest some other spots around town that you might want to go check out. The walk took us through, like I mentioned, we started in Manchester, then we walked along the river, we walked along the Mayo Bridge, down into Shacko Bottom, part of the Canal Walk, then up 15th Street over to past Main Street Station to Lumpkins Jail and the African burial grounds that are adjacent to that on underneath Broad. Well, yeah, you go through
an underpass,
or
whatever that
that's
thing
under
is.
Broad Street. Anyway, those are also places that I would strongly urge people to consider going to visit. There is a palpable tension that is still in the air when you arrive at where Lumpkins Jail once stood.
Yes.
There are now stones in a field. You know, they peeled back the parking lot when they discovered where it was. And then, so now grass is growing in that place. And there are stones that indicate, I guess, what was once the walkway leading to one of the buildings. There used to be 4 buildings on that site.
Right.
But there's literally a palpable tension that is still present in that space today that I think everyone should see and experience for themselves. Part of it for me, if I may be completely frank with people, was really appreciating the insult to injury, one after another, that even in that space, and then particularly leading over to the burial grounds, I think that was really where, even in that space, understanding that today, that, hundreds of years later, what we're doing day in and day out surrounds this space, but literally never confronts it.
Yes.
So our highways run by it. We have roadways that go all the way around it. And most people who are from Richmond probably have no idea where it is.
That's right.
But when you are there, you know you are there. And I think that I would just encourage people to go check that out for themselves, because it's a really, really, it's an amazing experience to be able to stand in a place where things have been happening for the last 400 years. And these things have been incredibly important. They might be things that you've been unfamiliar with before. They might be things that someone told you different stories about. But I think that when each of us takes the time to actually go out and experience some of that ourselves, we knit a closer community by beginning to see somebody else's story.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thanks. Thanks. I think that's why they let me keep coming back and doing the show.
It's okay. And so I'll also mention, I know we're probably over time now, but we do tours as well. We do pilgrimages. So we're going to be going to the National Museum in D.C. this summer, but we're also going to be doing a trek through the Trail of Enslaved Africans, or what we call the Richmond Slave Trail. So if any of your listening audience would like to come and do that, we've come to the table. The invitation is open.
Oh, cool.
We'd love to have them.
Neat. That's wonderful. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All righty. I hope that you guys found this evening informative. And I hope that you found something to celebrate yourselves. I think the getting together and understanding that we are given the opportunity to celebrate the freedom of all Americans on a whole extra special day, in addition to the celebrations that we will be having in a few weeks as we celebrate the birthday of the country. And the fact that these dates are relatively close together, but that they are not on the same date. And that's really intentional, and it should be. It should be. They should be separate days. And I think that that's really important too. But, we're fun people. We like to party. And so why not have more holidays, right?
Yeah. Why not?
Right?
Why not?
Anyway.
Second that motion.
Again, Amanda and Sherry and Danita, thank you so much for coming in tonight and being a part of creating this show. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go on the phone and then sign off on air. Thank you to you, audience. Anybody who's listening or still watching the live stream, thank you so much for tuning in and checking out what we are doing here at the Work FM. My name is Stephanie. This is In the Frequency of Hope. I'm going to see you guys next week on the 24th, and I believe we're going to be talking about a little pride. So have a good time till then.
All right.
All right. Well, that takes us back to the loop, which is already in progress. I think they're talking to some presidential candidates. And you find the conversation very interesting. They discuss the possibility of legalizing drug groups or perhaps just decriminalizing them. Legalizing isn't the word, perhaps. We need a little more cautious move. But it's a conversation that we're having at this point in time. Quite amazing. And you're hearing it right here on the Work FM. That is WRWK LP FM, serving Chesterfield, Richmond, Goochland, Henrico, Hanover, and parts of Powhatan. So here you go. Enjoy.
I mean, I hate greed, and I'm not really fond of the money-making corporate model that seems to be coming in. And so I don't know how any of the corporate money people talking about investments reacted to your notion of a mutual benefit corporation, and I don't give a flying. The question is, could you unpack that idea for folks?
Well, if you look at capitalism, it's about profit and unlimited growth, and and forget about the externalities. So not every company is like that at all, but in general, we're destroying the planet, and I think people are short-sighted on their narrow interests and not paying attention to the other. So the benefit corp is a modification of capitalism where you maximize public benefit, meaning you account for the externalities. You don't ignore them. And I think that's what we need. That's the problem with capitalism, is you offload the externalities on other people and you